If you haven't heard by now, there's a new Tolkien game out, Tales of the Shire. A cozy little game where you get to play as a hobbit in the Shire, but technically you just live in Bywater in the Shire. It's a game that haven't been much hype about, and probably for good reason, but we will get to that. Before we dive into the specifics, I'll admit this kind of game is not what I'd usually play myself. I'm more into strategy games, like Crusader Kings, Total War games, or something like Battle for Middle-earth. So for that reason, I'm probably also a little more harsh than others reviewing this game. I should also point out that I got my key for free by the developers, which I'm very grateful for. However, it does not influence my review in any way, as I value honesty way higher. But let's get started. The basics and story. So for starters, let's get an overview what this game is and what it's not. You start out as a hobbit from Bree, and by chance, Gandalf finds you on the road and leads you to your new home in Bywater. You know, the village right next to Hobbiton, where Bilbo and Frodo lives. You're taking over the former home of some hobbit. I'm not really sure what happened to that person, but who cares? Sadly, there's not much more story than that. You are free to explore Bywater and befriend the local inhabitants. That's pretty much the game. It's basically a live like a hobbit simulator, though I'll say a lot of stuff is left out lore-wise, but we will get to that. Game mechanics. In terms of game mechanics, I must say I'm not really impressed. There seems to be a lot of the components you would expect in such a game, but I don't think it's implemented very well. As you start up the game, you start by creating your own character. However, there's no clear distinctions between genders, so it's actually a little hard to create a character, or so I thought at least, especially if you want to play as a male character. No matter what I did, they all ended up looking rather female. And also you got a lot of customization for the hair on your feet, but not so much for anything else. I think fishing in the game is done in an unexpected way. That is new to me at least, but sadly, not that enjoyable. However, it was the best kind of gameplay I experienced in the couple of hours I tried the game. Sadly, you can only fish in a few spots, upgrade it once, and you know it will still give you the same type of fish over and over. You can of course find various plants and the like, plant your own garden, change your appearance, decorate your home, or, which seems to be the main part of the game, cook dinner and invite people over. This will increase your relationship with the local townsfolk. Sadly, the cooking aspect is quite tedious and mainly involves a bunch of clicking, so I guess some people will find this fun. I'm just not one of them. You can decorate the dinner table, which was an interesting and unexpected part of it, but that's about it. As you explore Bywater, you will get various quests, which I must admit just feels like the annoying side quest you have to do in larger RPGs, like finding specific herbs, asking NPCs about specific items, yes, it's a book, or perform a specific action that mainly just functions as a tutorial. So, yeah, it's not a groundbreaking game in any sort of way. There are no surprise mechanics or anything of that sort. But still, it offers what I guess most people would find enjoyable in a hobby simulator. Though I don't think it's implemented that well, and, you know, they could have implemented even more stuff if they really wanted. So if you're into grinding and doing the same kind of chores over and over again, you know, it might be a fitting game for you. Music and voice acting. Well, sadly for this game, there is no voice acting at all, which is probably one of the biggest letdowns of this entire game. I really think some voice acting could improve it a lot. And the thing is, there aren't that many characters in the game, so it wouldn't even require that many voice actors either. I'm not really sure why they decided not to include it. In terms of music, it's quite alright. It's cozy and relaxing, which works fine for a simulation game. Sadly, because there are few other sounds in the game, it becomes pretty repetitive and boring quite fast. especially if you are planning to play for several hours. Also, the music is not like how it's sure, as I guess some players would expect when playing a Hobbit game. Sure, there are some attempts at humorous dialogue, but at times it felt more cringe than honest attempts at sounding like Tolkien. The lore. So I had my doubts about this game even early on, as the depictions of hobbits seems more like a stereotype rather than what they actually are in the lore. So what do I mean by that? Well, it feels like it was developed by people that try to guess what a hobbit is, rather than read The Lord of the Rings and actually learn it. There's no drinking and no smoking involved, which is kind of ironic as it seems to be some of the core aspects of being a hobbit in the actual lore. The art of pipe smoking. Actually, it's the only thing I think hobbits would call an art. Also, in the story, Frodo, Sam and Pippin are considering a detour to an inn in the East Farthing, just to taste their beer. So you'd expect something like that to be part of the game, but sadly it's not. It's more suited for children. That's fair, but what about other aspects of hobbits then? Well, there's not much about gift giving, as you would expect, nor much gossip either. And lore-wise, just a little side note, I would also say that the local inhabitants should be a little more suspicious of someone from Bree. This is just based on the many comments they seem to have about hobbits from Buckland, which is far closer. There is gardening in the game, as you would expect, but it's not done in great detail. Sure, you can water your plants and, well, decorate, I guess. On top of that, there are a few locations from the lore to explore: the Green Dragon, the Cotton Family House, the Three Farthing Stone, and a handful more. The layout of Bywater is far from what it should be, but I can forgive that, as it's done in order to make the game look more nice and interesting. In terms of characters, we have Gandalf, Rosy Cotton, Sandyman, and a handful others, but none of them adds much to the story nor the overall gameplay. Then we have the case of Old Noakes, that is a minor character from the lore, but who has also been race swapped. I'm not really sure why they thought it necessary to race swap the local drunken town, but let's just leave it at that. When it comes to the homes of the hobbits, it sadly also falls into a common misconception about hobbits. They don't all live underground. Yeah, shocking, right? The vast majority of hobbit homes aren't smeals like this, but just normal houses. There are actually excellent artworks by Tolkien himself depicting what it would have looked like. Hobbiton at least. Now, would it have been awesome to see that? Yeah, it certainly would. Bugs, criticism, and more. I got to play the game just as the first real patch was released, so they are improving the game, which is good, but I have heard some graphic issues for people playing on Switch, which is unfortunate, as it's the platform they actually recommend playing on. In the game, you get guided by birds, which is an alright and cool way to do it, but it quickly got a little annoying seeing a blue bird on screen constantly, especially because it spawns behind you and then quickly vanishes into the sky. Not perfectly implemented, but it's a cool idea at least. On top of all that, we have the usual glitches, lag spikes, which seems to be common in new games these days. Still, it should be commented upon. It's not something I experience in many other games, especially larger games with better graphics, so hopefully it's just bugs that can be improved in some of the future patches. Controversies. A lot of people have called this game woke, even before we had any sort of gameplay to base that on. It certainly feels like it, given you can choose between man and female, and then there's the race swapping of characters from the actual lore. More could be said, but I don't find it very interesting to talk about, to be honest. I think this game would have been better if they put more energy into better game mechanics, voice acting, better world building, and taking more stuff from the actual lore. But that's just me. Feel free to disagree in the comments. Final verdict. So, what is my final verdict? Well, it's certainly on par with the recent Gollum game in several aspects. But to be honest, I'm probably more inclined to replay that game rather than Tales of the Shire. It's not because it's a terrible game, but there's not much reason to replay it. When you have played for a couple of hours, the gameplay is rather repetitive and, as mentioned, not the kind of game I'd normally play. I think if they added voice acting and more elements from the lore, it would feel a lot more like the Shire and, actual hobbits. If it had been a game where you could explore the entirety of the Shire and perhaps become a traveling merchant or own your own tavern, I might have enjoyed it. But sadly, that's not the type of game this is. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. It's not something I plan to replay again. It doesn't mean you won't enjoy it though, if this is your type of game. So, I recommend you to watch some more gameplay before you decide buying it or not. At least the developers are still working on patches, and who knows, maybe some major updates will come down the line. Still, at the end of it all, the game feels like all the extra stuff you can do in most RPGs, like Skyrim. I bet there's even a Hobbit Hole mod for it, which means this game feels like a DLC rather than a whole game. But that's just my opinion, of course. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the Tales of the Shire. Let me know what you think about the game down below. And farewell till next time.